All right, well, we're about at noon, it looks like. So, hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Schiffer. I'm the Graduate Research Assistant for the Teaching and Learning Center. Don can't be here today. He's participating in an event for KS Unite. But you've made your way to our TLC Professional Development Series, which meets every Wednesday at noon. Before I get to some announcements and today's event, I'm going to share my screen and we will do the land acknowledgement. And Brandie, could you give me a thumbs up if you see my screen? Okay, perfect. Great. Thank you. Here we go.
As the first land grant institution established under the 1862 Morrill Act, we acknowledge that the state of Kansas is, historically, home to many native nations, including the Kaw, Osage, and Pawnee, among others. Furthermore, Kansas is the current home to 4 federally recognized native nations: the Prairie Band Potawatomi, the Kickapoo Tribe of Kansas, the Iowa Tribe of Kansas and Nebraska, and the Sac and Fox Nation Missouri in Kansas and Nebraska.
Many native nations utilize the western plains of Kansas as their hunting grounds, and others, such as the Delaware, were moved through this region during Indian removal efforts to make way for white settlers. It's important to acknowledge this, since the land that serves as the foundation of this institution was, and still is, stolen land.
We remember these truths because K-State's status as a land-grant institution is a story that exists within ongoing settler colonialism and rests on the dispossession of indigenous peoples and nations from their lands. These truths are often invisible to many. The recognition that K-State's history begins and continues through indigenous contexts is essential.
Please remember
These truths,
because we still remember.
All right. So, a couple of things just coming up to put on your radar. Oh, this is replaying. Okay. A couple of things coming up. Next week, we will have an event from our colleagues over at CAPS talking about mental health and stress management. After Thanksgiving break, we'll have an event with Miss Melissa Glasser talking about work-life balance, which will be very important as we have a break coming up. It'll be very important to learn how we can restore and recharge for next semester. But today's event will be led by Brandie Disberger. This was an event that we learned about through our SOTL showcase. So that's also a quick little plug for something we'll start talking about next semester and soliciting applications and submissions for. This was a very cool event, so we wanted to give her some time and space during our professional development series. So, Brandie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ashley. I appreciate it. Yeah, also a plug for Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. What a great way to advance our research while also serving our students at a higher level. Today's focus is really going to be on how we develop curriculum for our programs. And what I mean by that is, how do we decide what courses we are going to require students to take, or how many hours they need in a particular area? And some of those choices we know don't necessarily come down to the department level, but they're more at the higher level, perhaps by KBOR or Kansas State University. But a majority of our curriculum, we do have the ability to adapt and adjust based on our students' needs. The project that we're sharing today was done over pretty much a 9-month period starting in May of 2023. And then we went through the fall of 2023 and then finalized early in 2024. This all started with the animal science department coming to me and saying, we know that our curriculum could use some updates. We know that we're going to have to make some changes based on some KBOR requirements. So instead of just being reactive to the new rules, instead, why don't we be proactive and really think about our curriculum as a whole and how we can make it better meet the needs of our students? We also went into this thinking we think that updates need to happen, but we don't know that. So maybe this is just going to validate the program is doing what they're supposed to be doing, and that's okay too. That's also a great finding. If you're not familiar with, animal science is, if not one of the largest departments in the entire university. They're the largest department in the College of Agriculture. So when we embarked on this, we were really doing it with a large amount of faculty and students in mind. So let's talk a little bit about how this worked. And then I would like to hear from those participating today a little bit about you. So be prepared to drop some feedback in the chat and answer a few questions. So, oops. So the steps in the process that we utilized, actually, I'm going to jump to this one first. I think first we need to talk about what is curriculum design. It is making those foundational choices for our students. What are the requirements going to be, but also what are the options going to be in their 120 hours, give or take, that they get a degree, maybe all here at Kansas State University, but more likely a combination of multiple institutions as we see more and more students bring credit from other institutions. What students take and how they're prepared is a key indicator on how they will be prepared for their career, or we certainly hope that is the case. The animal science program decided to embark on this because they knew that they had those changes coming with KBOR, and they knew that prior revisions were reactive. So I'm thinking about the department that I work in, communications and agricultural education. I am faculty and an advisor in agricultural education. The most significant changes that have been made to our curriculum over the last several years have been, number one, and most recently in response to the KBOR general education. Now, while we did make other changes related to that, that was really the motivator to make that change. And so we knew we had to incorporate that. Prior to that, it was when 120 credit hours came down. So we had to be reactive again, like how is that going to look? And then we also made some additional, what I would call more proactive changes at that time as well. However, we really haven't taken the time to look at the entire program, what our students need, what the faculty see the graduates needing, and most importantly, our stakeholders. So drop in the chat a couple of things for me. Number one, what is the college program or department that you work with? And how many years has it been since you made a curriculum change that wasn't simply responding to a requirement? I'll give you a moment to share those items. Now they're really rolling in. Thanks so much. So we look at maybe a major revision in 2015 for early childhood education. Thank you for that. Psychological sciences, maybe we haven't done one in the last 2 years. We're not sure before that. That's all right. Biology is doing some changes. So great. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully you gained something from this that you can use. Some of them we're just not sure of. I think that it's hard for us to take a step back and say, oh, we should embark on something that's going to be time consuming, something that's going to be extra. But when we really think about the products that we are creating, our graduates being as best prepared as they can for the workforce, it certainly has been a worthwhile endeavor for the program of animal science that we are looking at. So a few minutes, we're going to talk exactly about what we did, the steps in the process and why we did it. And then we're going to reflect a little bit on if we were to do it again, here are some things that we might do differently. And then I'll open it up for questions as a whole. Thanks for the additional items that are coming in the chat. I am definitely monitoring them. Computer science, I think animal science was probably feeling about like you. Major changes hadn't happened since about the 1990s. Now, again, it doesn't mean that we were underserving our students necessarily, but we hadn't checked. We hadn't learned what the current needs are and are we meeting those? So let's talk a little bit about what we did in the process. First, we had a meeting with faculty and we determined where was the department and the program now. What were the strengths? What were the weaknesses? And then our focus was really not on what classes do students need to take, but what do they need to know as a graduate of this program? And that is an important frame for the entire process. Framing it on what classes do they or do they not need isn't as helpful to us. And it becomes more about that person's class or that program or department's class. It comes a little territorial, right? When we focused on just what are the skills and knowledge our graduates need, then we also weren't bound by what the current offerings are. We could think about new classes or adjusting classes to meet some needs that maybe we felt like we weren't. So the focus was learning from the faculty at the first step. What do they believe all graduates? Now, that was really important to frame as well, that we're not talking about graduates who want to go to vet school need this, or graduates that want to go back into production agriculture need this. We wanted to know everyone who we say is a graduate of our program is going to know this. And then we'll deal with specialties, focus areas later. Once we established what all graduates need to know, we then leaned on our faculty and stakeholders to get some survey data, and we did it with a Delphi process. And we'll talk more about how that process worked. But we needed these decisions to be made by the faculty, but others needed to weigh in. We needed a broader audience, those who are advising our graduate students, those who are employing our graduates. Are they seeing that the young people have the skills that are needed by the industry? Once we got our stakeholder survey back, we finalized our student learning outcomes. They had a great set of student learning outcomes, but we found that what we learned from these 3 steps were informing us that they needed to be updated and adjusted a little bit. After we knew the foundational knowledge for all students, our SLOs, we then moved to a curriculum mapping process, which means at what point is every student going to learn these student learning outcomes? And there's a couple of different ways you can think about learning, as like introducing, exercising, practicing, and applying. So there's more than one level that we talked about in curriculum mapping. Once we got the map out and saying, okay, here are the core classes that every student in animal science needs to take, then we developed a core curriculum around that. Here are the foundational for all. And then our final step was to work on areas of concentration. So what are the options going to be within the animal science program? Now let's dissect each of these steps a little bit. You might be wondering, well, I don't know what she means by any of those. I want you to see the whole process, and now we'll talk step by step on what that actually looked like. So the first thing we did was met with the entire faculty. And in animal science, they're a very large department. I think when it got said and done, we had about 60 individuals invited to this faculty meeting. And we identified what was working, what needs improved, and how we want people to look at the animal science program. This was done with brainstorming of large sticky note paper, refining, revising, lots of group discussions, and gathering the information that they were feeling. We wanted to be careful that we didn't change something that was highly effective. So let's figure out what is working and make sure that we don't lose that in our process. We also want to focus on what are known areas of improvement if we're going to do a curriculum revision. And finally, we want to describe how we want the outside to think about the product and what the department does. So that was the focus of the first meeting, and also talking through what this process is going to look like, what they can expect as a final result. The next meeting with the faculty was learning about what we learned from that main group meeting, and we got some results here. So what we learned was communication was really important for our students, and it was an area that we knew we needed to improve. Like the faculty were observing that this isn't something students were comfortable with. Critical thinking was a high priority for students to have, and also identified as an area that we felt like students needed to improve. The faculty advising happening in the department was a strength and an area for improvement. And the curriculum had strong positive themes, but we also found several curriculum items that turned up in the list of areas for improvement. Other things that we learned about was that they wanted teamwork, to be an end goal, but also an area of improvement. So the primary considerations were very strong themes that came out of these conversations. The secondary considerations were maybe not as strong, but definitely present, looking at leadership. And then number 3 is hands-on learning. I want you to watch that one because the hands-on learning really evolved into a pretty cool piece when we got to the final stage of this project. In step 2, we used what they called a DACUM process. DACUM is developing a curriculum. It is out of The Ohio State University. You can actually go and get trained in a week-long training to be DACUM certified. I was able to lean on some resources, and we started our second meeting with faculty with the item of what does every animal science graduate need to know? In the scenario that I built for them to prepare them for this process, we use the example of an adult. So everyone in this meeting were in groups of about 5 people per group, and they were to use sticky notes to write down everything they felt like an animal science graduate needed to know. This is definitely brainstorming. We're not worried about if they're duplicated. We're not worried about if they're more important than the other. It's just everything that you feel like a graduate needs to know, similar to a list of things an adult needs to know. And then as a team, they were to organize these cards into themes. So for example, using the adult example, a homeowner needs to know exterior, home, and lawn maintenance and be able to identify abnormalities in their home. Where related to vehicle, we had a few different items. So products of this process might have been titled, in nutrition, we need to be able to know these following things. Related to reproduction, we needed to know these following things. With each group, again, the group's having about 5 people, they were organizing the individual thoughts and categorizing them in these categories. And then I got to take all of these back. Fascinating process to go back to my office and try to make sense of all of the sticky notes and the labels and the categorization. But what we found was the themes that came out of these group conversations were pretty strong and provided us a lot of guidance in our next couple of steps. So the DACUM process was really where we focused in on what do the graduates need to know. Keep in mind that it wasn't just focused on animal science content knowledge, but also skills like communication, teamwork, and problem solving. So out of that very fascinating meeting, there were 227 items that were submitted. And that is after we took out replication. And those were categorized into 14 themes. So an example of a theme that came out was critical thinking. And the faculty said they need to be able to problem solve, evaluate information, form an educated opinion or argument. A more animal science focused example was like nutrition. And here are the 6 items that they felt like, again, all graduates needed to be comfortable with related to nutrition. These are 2 examples of our themes and our items. Keep in mind that when we got done, we had 14 themes and 227 items in those. So what do you do with all this information? Well, we needed to figure out how to start paring it down and finding the most critical items. It's important that once an item made it to this step, it was never gotten rid of, but it was made a higher or a lower priority because we didn't want to lose those minor priorities because very much there was the possibility that they would develop into those specialty areas or the options later on. But our first goal was to figure out what we really felt like every graduate needed to know. So we took these items and we started the Delphi survey process. So the Delphi survey is a tool utilized to find consensus. So simply amongst the faculty, we gave them the 14 themes and the 136 unduplicated competencies. We were able to narrow things down that maybe were worded differently, but could be complementary to get to our 136 items from the 226. For each of the competencies, every faculty member was invited to provide feedback that all, most, some, or no animal science graduates need to know this. And open-ended items were also invited for each of the themes. So if they felt like something was in the wrong theme, duplicated another place, could be worded better, we were able to take that feedback as well. After the faculty survey, items that got at least 50% of the faculty saying all graduates needed to know were ready to go on to a survey that went broader and included our stakeholders. When we narrowed that down, we were to 12 themes and 84 competencies. This happened in July. So the faculty meetings were a May and June activity, and the stakeholder survey was deployed in July. We decided that the group that we were after were recent alumni who were graduates with an animal science major from 2012 to 2022. That was the alumni group that we wanted to hear from. The second group that fell into our stakeholders were individuals with the department and university have knowledge of employed animal science graduates. And the Career Center helped us with identifying who fell into that category. We were able to lean on our advisors to give us some information about professional and graduate school advisors in animal science. They could identify some who had worked with our recent graduates. We were also able to lean on our veterinary science school here at K-State. And finally, we invited stakeholders who served on relevant departmental and state boards and committees in agriculture across the state to weigh in on what they felt like graduates needed. Once that survey results came back, the faculty resulted in 27 responses. The stakeholder survey responses, there was 187. Of those, slightly over half were alumni determined the recent graduates. Then we had some employers, 15% employers, stakeholders, and then 5% professional school advisors. What we were looking for when the results came back is the feedback from the faculty and how that compared to the stakeholder. So you'll remember that that first cut score on the Delphi was 50% of the faculty so had to say all graduates need it in order to make it to the stakeholders. Now we were identifying some place that we didn't have consensus. So the second round, we used 75% consensus. And you'll see that the example in front of you, there were places where faculty said it was very important, well over the 75 threshold, that they know things, but actually we got maybe just under that in the stakeholder, or perhaps the stakeholders felt that it was more important than what our faculty did. When we had these inconsistencies, we took it to the advisor faculty meeting, which is a smaller group within the animal science faculty who are selected to make some decisions. I took those that were either high in one and not the other or vice versa, and we had conversations about whether we felt like those needed to be included in the SLOs or not. So step 4 was turning these items that are deemed to be essential for all graduates into our student learning outcomes and related competencies. So we took the competencies that made it in those 2 thresholds, and then we organized them into final themes. Those themes later became the SLOs. So you can see we finalized 3 more what we call foundational skill SLOs, including communication, professional skills, and critical thinking. And then we had animal science related ones, and those are described on the right. In the living document, each of these SLOs lists the competencies that were identified as critical and that were combined to make the SLOs. So we'd made some decisions now. We knew the foundational skills that all students needed to know, and now we needed to figure out how we were going to ensure the students gained that knowledge. So we went to a curriculum mapping process. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the 6 SLOs, and on the right-hand side, you'll see some required experiences for all students. And what we were doing was developing what later became the core curriculum for animal science. So we identified that they needed verbal and written communication skills. And we agreed that those would be introduced in the communications and English buckets of the general education. But we also wanted communication skills that were specific to animal science, or rather, they get the opportunity to reinforce and master communication within animal science. And so we identified that they would get the opportunity to do that in some of our capstone and upper level courses. Not just learn about communication, but apply it to the animal science industry. This experiential learning requirement I mentioned at the very beginning on how we were going to require students to have these experiences. So there are courses in animal science that are related to undergraduate research, to some oral public speaking activities like judging events. And so we identified courses that fell under experiential learning and really started to find how this is a place where our students can master a lot of skills that they're learning in other places in the curriculum. So as you can see, for each SLO, we had to find a place that we were going to introduce this, reinforce it, master it, and assess it. And I used this one that wasn't finalized. You can see that by the highlights, because these are the types of conversations we had with the faculty. For example, applying critical thinking in the animal science industry. Which of these three do we really want to make sure that all graduates are assessed on that skill? The P's, thank you for that question. It's introduced and practiced. P represents practice. You'll notice that there's inconsistencies, and I was noticing that as well. It says R is reinforced and the opportunity to practice. Unfortunately, my key identified R and my chart identifies P. So sorry for confusion related to that, but it's the opportunity for them to exercise that skill. Okay. Step 5 of 7, we're getting there. We're almost ready to open it up for some larger conversations. This is when the fun stuff happens though. This is what we came out with. One of the things that Dr. Jones identified for me when we started this process was outside of Animal Science 102, there were very little to no common experiences for their graduates. They really had a lot of flexibility in their curriculum, which was exciting, but it was really difficult to ensure that we had these foundational skills because there were so few broadly required courses. So what came out of this was a huge change to the animal science curriculum, introducing what is called the animal science core classes. And regardless of what their career plan is, their option, their specialty, this is the set of 19 hours that all students will take. They need to have a foundational class. So this is that first semester experience for everyone. And if they're an incoming freshman, they take it for 1 credit hour credit. If they're an incoming transfer student, they're able to do that for 0 credit hours. But it's still a requirement that the first semester, they will take a foundations experience. And then you'll see here are the core classes that all students will take. And then they have to have concentration classes. And you'll notice if we were to go back to the curriculum mapping, there are places where they needed to either master or assess some of the skills in their content. And so that's when the content or the concentration courses came, that they had some experience in breeding and genetics, some experience in animal management, but also giving the students some options and some flexibility. The applied learning experience is the really unique place that we've talked about throughout this. They are requiring that all students record an applied learning experience, whether that be undergraduate research. There's a quadrathlon that's like a quiz bowl. There's some judging teams. There's international travel, but every student needs to take a course that is categorized as applied learning. And again, that's a place where we really found that they could really exercise and master some of those student learning outcomes. So the final area of decisions was made for how are students going to concentrate in a particular area. In the old curriculum, there were 6 curriculum options. Animal production and that column there, I don't need to read that to you, but you can see that they had a lot of places where they could, I guess, customize their animal science degree. A major change that came out of this curriculum revision was moving from 6 options to 2. Now, animal science are either pre-vet or they are management industry. It doesn't mean the students have less options. It means their options look differently. Instead of having 6 different curriculums, they actually chose to have 2 and increase the number of students who are able to take certificates. And certificate programs are actually where students are choosing to focus rather than options within the curriculum. So as a result of all of these changes, we actually also found that we needed some new courses. Historically, animal science lab classes had been 1 credit hour, and you had to take poultry and dairy together. They decided to break those apart so students can pick and choose the combination of laboratory credits that they wanted. They also created a foundational level. So this one is a sophomore level nutrition class, feeds and feeding. And then the domestic animal anatomy, the only animal anatomy class that they had before was really high level. And they wanted to get some foundational anatomy classes in there. And the thought is eventually some of the baseline anatomy that's needed to apply knowledge in reproduction and nutrition and feeds and feeding will be able to be taught in that class and allow the secondary level classes to go deeper into other areas. We also added the transfer foundational for the transfer students. So when we got all said and done, this 9-month process that we had embarked on, there were some things that I think that we would do differently if we were to do it again. One is it felt like it went long. It was a really long process. We started in May and we concluded it kind of in January with finalizing these, but really it was a full year by the time we did all of the course proposals and curriculum applications to make the changes. So a 12-month process. If we were to go back, I think some of those initial meetings that were an hour and a half with faculty, maybe we could have turned that into a half day or a day-long retreat and been able to move on some of that energy that we had going instead of starting and stopping and starting and stopping. So my advice would be, if I were to do this again, I think that we would work to do it in a shorter time period. So we didn't lose as much momentum. We didn't have to do as many reviewing and then making decisions. That being said, at some point we have to have that pause in order to really get that stakeholder feedback. So it's certainly not something that could be done in a couple of days, but I think that we would shorten the time frame. All right. With that being said, that is the basics of what we did. And I'd love to open it up for some questions, but more importantly, just some conversations about how can we improve our process of revising curriculum.
Hey, thanks, Brandie. I saw your SOTL talk too, so I love to get reinforced here. Can you remind me, and maybe share with everyone else, how you navigated all the different personalities in a department?
Yeah. So I think that that was important for me coming in as the facilitator. I am in another department within the College of Agriculture. So I understood their courses. My students were taking their courses. I also had the opportunity of having an animal science minor from K-State as an undergraduate. So I was very familiar with the individuals in the department, with the courses, but I wasn't in the department. So I think I had a very unique skill set to be able to facilitate this. Also, my advanced degrees are within curriculum instruction in the College of Education. So I definitely had that background and tools that I could bring to the table with an understanding, though, of what the department is and does.
On your curriculum map, you were historically assessing kind of towards the end of their journey, was there ever a talk of doing assessment kind of the beginning and the end so you can compare the two, or kind of what led to the decision to only do it at the end?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think our motivation to do it at the end was so that we have those opportunities for practice. We wanted to make sure that students got to apply the knowledge and exercise it before we did the final assessments. But you make a great point that with the new requirement of having those foundational courses, it would be much easier now for us to do some pre-assessment on where are our students at. And then that could also make sure that we are staying on the cusp of student needs, and not having this elongated time before we do this major curriculum revision again. So how can our departments think about pre and post assessment so that we can be more reactive to current changes in our student population and also our needs of our industry? I think those are the two things that we really work to balance. How are our students' needs changing? How are our graduate skills changing?
Hi, Brandie. I'm Heather Bailey from Psych Sciences. Thank you so much for this. This was like perfect timing because we are planning, actually trying to plan a retreat for June, actually. So what I was actually wondering, when you had said you wish you had done that, were you thinking about you would have combined your steps 1 and 2 for that stage? Okay. And then I think where I was tracking, I've taken so many notes and I may have to reach out with questions, but I think where I got lost a little bit is what was happening in the curriculum mapping stage. Were you like listing all the courses that are part of the curriculum right now? And then do they meet any of the SLOs? And if they didn't, you dropped them or they were moved to electives? I think that's where I got lost. Like, how did something become a core versus an elective? Or, yeah. Would you mind?
Great question, Heather. So to back up, yes, I would combine step 1 and 2. I feel like we had to like take a break and then we had to remember where we were at and then we had to do some more stuff, and it we lost some momentum and time there with that 2 session versus 1 just big, hey, let's get this out there. The curriculum mapping, yeah, I would say I skipped a step in there. We sent a Qualtrics survey to the faculty and we said, these are our SLOs. And by the way, we actually surveyed the entire faculty when we wrote those SLOs, and we said, here are our old SLOs, here are our new proposed SLOs, and here is the National Association of Animal Science SLOs. Which do you think best fits the needs of our department? And they voted to adopt the new ones that we had proposed. So we didn't say here they are. We actually gave them some options and they chose to move forward with those. Once those were finalized, then I sent the SLOs and those indicators to the faculty in a survey. And I said, what courses should they learn this? And I kind of identified introduce, practice, master, assess. And they gave me the initial list of courses that we needed to look at that became the top of that chart. And then we met with the teaching and learning committee and we said, okay, here are all the places that it's been proposed that they get introduced, practiced, mastered, and assessed. Where do we think it needs to go for all students' sake? So going back to Natalie's conversation about like, how do we make sure that we manage all of these players, right? So we had group discussion and sometimes it was like contentious, right? Like we are not agreeing, we're kind of at a stuck point. I would then go back to those all faculty surveys and our stakeholders. And I think that allowed us to weigh in on what does the larger population feel related to this item. So it's facilitation skills, but it's also making sure that we are showing the voice of those who aren't at the table. And we are able to do that because we had the survey results. This was also a big process of let's talk, let's discuss, let's create a product, let's do a Delphi and get some consensus. Okay, now we have a new product. Okay, let's do some survey anonymous. Tell me what you really think, get some consensus, and then we came back together. So the benefit of some of that back and forth was we were able to resolve some of the harder decisions by getting a variety of means of feedback.
Brandie, I'm wondering how this went over with students who may have started the program, having certain expectations about the courses that they were supposed to take, and
Mhm.
how that process may have shifted their expectations and how that went over for them.
Actually, that's a great question. And it also brings up maybe what some might identify as a group we didn't ask, which is our current students. We talked about it, but we really felt like our recent alumni was the one we really needed the feedback from, because our goal was, what do all graduates need to know? And sometimes our current students don't know what they don't know, and they don't know what they need to know. But we felt like our recent alumni was that voice of the recent student, not the current student. So yes, our students who were current students in animal science, their curriculum did not change as a result of this. At least it wasn't a required change. It phased in with the next group of students who came into K-State on their catalog year. Um, Generally speaking, this is such a unique combination of more and less flexible than what we had. I do believe that it's served students very well, but we also only have one group of students who have started on this curriculum, so time will still tell us more. The previous curriculum had a lot more flexibility within the entire curriculum. This one has some super required courses, that core, but then it has way more flexibility on the rest. Where the other one was smaller categories with a couple of different options throughout the entire curriculum. So instead of giving them limited options throughout the curriculum, we made some required and we made some broader options.
Okay, thank you. And it looks like that
Mhm.
actually answers Ted's question in the chat more or less.
Great.
So thank you.
Another thing that I think was really important for us to think about, and it came up a lot of in conversations, less in the PowerPoint, was the demographics of our students. And keep in mind that we have a huge group of transfer students in the animal science program that we definitely thought about throughout this entire process. We also have a 100% online bachelor's degree. So we had to think about our online students as well, and how would they be able to meet this curriculum, along with our non-traditional students who might have other obligations. So I would encourage anyone who is looking at a major curriculum revision to not just think about our traditional on-campus students, but how are you going to be able to meet the needs of a diverse population of students who needs to exercise your degree requirements. So Theodore has a question about our responses by recent and older. The only one we put in the alumni was in the last 10 years, and we did not further sort them like 1 to 5 or 6 to 10. We just left them as a category of recent alumni. We also we struggled a little bit with the impact of COVID and the changes to their undergraduate experience. In the end, we decided to treat them as a group. That would have been another really good reason why we may have benefited from pulling those two groups apart, maybe worrying less about the number of years, but those who went through the program under COVID restrictions and those who didn't. So. So let's talk about like where we go from here, right? Like, so we have gotten this new curriculum out. We have our first group of students who are on that new curriculum right now. Dr. Jones, who was my partner in this project, she is the teaching coordinator in animal science. And we specifically talked about, if nothing else, that stakeholder survey. We want to make something that is on a continual cycle. We may need to adjust the items, but instead of just waiting until we decide we want to check, how about we put that on a cycle of every 5 years? We do a stakeholder survey and we get some feedback so that we could monitor change and be more reactive to that. I think that we also got some really positive feedback from our stakeholders that they were asked. And while we did limit it to a certain category of individual. We also talked about, what if now that we have our collection related to this, we put this out on social media and allowed anybody to give us some feedback? Are there some things that would come from that could also be really helpful in informing our practices for the future? My summary and all of this would be, if we can do this in animal science, anybody can do it. Because it is such a large department of students. It's such a large department of faculty. The diversity of the student is significant. So there are many times where I embarked on this and I'm like, wish I got to practice. I wish I was able to practice or try this out on a smaller program first. But it was really enriching that we could do this with such a large group of people who had, had playing in the game, whether it be the recent graduates, whether it be the people who are working on campus, those who are hiring our graduates. So I would say that anyone can do this because you're probably going to be working with a smaller population than what we did.
Excellent. Are there any other questions for Brandie while we have her? And again, I will be posting the video recording of this on our website. I dropped the link for that in the chat if you want to revisit this, or if you know someone who wants to watch this asynchronously. Are there any other questions? Otherwise, I have a couple of remaining announcements.
I was going to say, I was just going to ask really quick, Brandie, thank you. And are you open to being contacted for additional questions?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
As I put this together, it was really an example of one of those, we built the plane while we were flying. We're like, yeah, here's our end goal. While we based it on some really key pieces like Delphi and like the DACOM process, we truly were like, okay, now this is what we got. What should we do to get us to the next step? So while this process is not perfect, I really truly did enjoy going through the process with the faculty, and I'll be happy to support any other programs who have an interest in updating their curriculum for the needs of their graduates, but more importantly, those who are hiring them.
Thank you. You'll
Yep.
probably hear from us, as Heather
Okay,
said.
great.
All right. Well, if there's nothing else, I know we've been trying to end our events a little bit earlier to allow people to make it to their 1 p.m. commitments that they may have. But as many of you know, if you attend enough of these professional development events, you can earn a TLC professional development certificate, and I'll drop the information for that in the chat. Part of the guidelines for that is completing a post-event survey for the events that you attend or watch asynchronously. So that link is also there. But other than that, we do have 2 more events for the rest of the semester, and we're looking forward to those. But thank you so much today, Brandie, for your expertise in this area, and we appreciate it.